Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sheri.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
Today in show number 73, Sheri and I will be picking up where we left off with our Palatine Hill walk. We'll be going down and walking the Roman Forum, which was the center of the government and the functioning of the Roman Empire. So we hope you enjoy our walk. Well, we're not moving very far on our map. We were up here at the Palatine Hill. Now we're just going down to the bottom of the hill, going right down through this direction right here. And again, looking at the 7 hills of Rome, we'll be walking along the base of the Palatine Hill. Now here's kind of a schematic showing the whole region. So we'll be, again, starting right from where we entered, and we'll be going down all the way towards the Capitoline Hill region. From an aerial view, again, obviously the Palatine Hill is very visible, and we'll be heading right down this direction towards the Capitoline Hill. And you can see some of the buildings. I know everybody says, oh, the Forum, you don't need to go there. It's mostly ruins. It wasn't as badly damaged as I thought it was. I enjoyed it. Now, one of the things I want to point out is right here was a whole series of temples. Temple of Venus, and that's for the most part gone. They get excavated and bring some of that back, but we're actually going to start right here at the Titus Arch. If we were to suddenly put all of the buildings in place, this is what it would look like. You can see it's just a complete jumble. The Basilica of Constantine, Temple of Peace, Library of Peace, all of these different areas, temples of Julius Caesar, Arch of Augustus. So you can see it was very crowded. When you go there today, it looks very open. And this final schematic will show you what we are going to see. Now, as I said before, Temple of Venus in Roma is not there. There's just a little piece of it. We're going to start right down here with the Arch of Titus. And then we're going to go this direction to the Basilica of Maximus, and then move further down. We reach the point where we have the tomb of Romulus, and then the Vestal Virgin House, and then the Antoninus Pius and Faustinia, and the Temple of the Vestal Virgins, and the Temple of Dioscuri. The Basilica of Amelia over here there's just a few pieces of it that are left. Then there's the Roman Curia, square in the middle, and then the Basilica of Julia. Then we will go back out to take our tour of the Colosseum. But I've already put a Colosseum tour up, so you'll just look for it in the list of materials. So let's start walking. Well, here's the vantage point that I shot the overall above pictures of the Forum that we'll be seeing as we go through. So here we are looking down where we're going to start. And you see the Colosseum in the background, and you see the arch, which is the Arch of Titus. And then here's a view as we come up to the Arch of Titus. Now from this point, this is where we would have split off and gone up the Palatine Hill. So now we're going to go through it or around it. Now, according to the description on the upper story in this single archway, it was built by the Emperor Domitian in 81 AD in honor of his brother and predecessor Titus. It celebrates the suppression of the Jewish revolt in Palestine and the occupation of Jerusalem by Titus and his father Vespasian in 71 AD. Now there's a lot of decorative relief which of course refers to this event, particularly on the outer side of the frieze. There's a depiction of the triumph of both rulers, but only the relief on the eastern side is really well preserved, and there are several sections where you can see the goddess of victory. So when you get closer to it, here we have the shot where we're underneath it, looking up. Of course, this is just covered with all sorts of artwork. And then here we have one of the examples of the victorious leaders coming in on their chariot in front of their people. So that's our entrance. There are actually 3 arches in the region. The one we'll end with is the one, the Septimus Cerebus, but right by the Colosseum is one of Emperor Constantine. Now as we walk through, here is the view looking down into the Forum. Now we're at one of the high spots, so we're going to go down and then it'll level out. And then here we are with our schematic. So we are now headed to this building right here, the Basilica of Maximus. And again, from above, You see the open area in here, which would have had buildings previously. And then looking across, you see this gigantic building. Now, this was a law court. When you have a basilica is a law court. Each little section would have judges. They'd have an antechamber where people would be waiting their turn, and then everybody responsible for the trials and whatever would be inside. Then these are then taken later on and used for churches, with the main altar in the middle and side altars on either side. It worked out very well. The Basilica of Maximus, the three huge barreled vaults, are all that remains of the building. At one time, it was one of the finest buildings in Imperial Rome. If you visited the Forum in antiquity, it had a shining altar, and its roof was covered with gilded tiles. However, the tiles were removed in the 7th century and reused in building Old St. Peter's. Maximus began the work on the basilica between 306 and 310 on the site of a large Flavian complex with storerooms and other utilitarian buildings. It was completed later under the advisory of Constantine the Great, who made considerable modifications to its original plan by turning its main axis 90 degrees and moving the entrance from the east to the south side. The measurement of those two gigantic aisles would have been 80 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 35 meters high. In other words, 262 feet, 82 feet with 115 feet in height. So it is quite stunning. So there's a little closer view of it. In some places you can go in, some places they have it blocked off, but you can just see the monumental nature. And you can see a couple of little spots where some of the original marble would have been. This is all that's left. There's a little closer view of one of the sections of the basilica, and a little closer view at where they would have had one of the columns in the corner. And then walking back out, this set of purple marble, profili, which comes from Egypt, was put in place by Constantine the Great. And it would have had a nice little portico here that you would have entered first before going into the actual building. Now, our next stop is one of the places I was really looking forward to seeing. We leave the Basilica of Maximus and begin walking towards the Palatine Hill. On our map, we are going to be walking to this little building right here, which of course was turned into a church. This is the supposed tomb of Romulus. Now, from an aerial standpoint, we've been coming right down this direction, and we're going to be going to this round building right here. Now, what you see in front of us right here, that is the House of the Vestal Virgins. It was relatively small to begin with, and then they enlarged it over the years. Now, here's a little closer shot of the wonderful Temple of Romulus. There's a legend that he's buried underneath it. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So here we are coming up to it. It's funny, once you get close to the buildings, it's a little harder to recognize what's going on. And so here we are getting ready to go into the main area. It was a church. Obviously, it was turned into a church. And here you see, again, the profili marble columns. And then on the inside, they have some displays. Now, these are two horses that you see. And there are several other pieces of art scattered around. But you can see the altar in the building right here. One of the main altars. And here's some of the stucco on the wall. It was beautiful at one time. But they began excavating it a couple of years after we were there. And they found this open chamber down below and then began excavating. And this is the way they entered it. They entered it from the front of the building. And they found a tomb sarcophagi on the inside. And it dates back to the time of the founding of Rome. So it is possible, it's a little closer shot of the sarcophagi, that this was actually the burial of one of the early leaders of Rome. So if you ever get a chance to go to the Forum, you've got to stop here and walk in. Say hello to Romulus. Well, we don't have a long way to go for our next stop, which is the Temple of Antoninus Pius and Faustina. It's right next door to Romulus's tomb. Here's our aerial view of the building. And then a nice side view as we advance toward it. You see it's in pretty good condition. Of course, there is a church built inside the columns that wasn't there initially. The temple was erected by Emperor Antoninus Pius to honor his deceased and deified wife, Faustina, who died in 141 AD. After his death in 161 AD, the temple was then dedicated to him as well. The modifications of the exterior and the interior structure go back to the conversion of the building into the Church of San Lorenzo in 1150. The masonry between the columns, however, was removed again for the visit of Emperor Charles V to Rome in 1536, and the Baroque facade of that church dates from 1602. Now, a broad flight of steps leads from the Via Sacra up to the tall podium. There are the 6 columns, which are 56 feet high or 17 meters along the facade, made out of Eboan marble and have Corinthian capitals of white marble. And then there are 2 more columns on the long sides. The frieze of winged griffins, candelabras, and vegetative motifs that adorn the emblature is considered to be one of the outstanding works of Roman decorative art. And there we are standing directly in front of the beautiful columns. And then here we are backing away as we're heading towards the home of the Vestal Virgins. Now we're headed to the house of the Vestal Virgins, which is located right here. The House of the Vestal Virgins, by the way, the only female priesthood in Rome, stands beside the Temple of Vesta. Its remains also date back to the reconstruction of Emperor Septimus Severus. Consisted of several rectangular courtyards with 3 pools of water at the center, surrounded by 2-story columned halls. At the sides of the courtyard were buildings on several floors containing rooms where the priestesses lived and domestic offices were located. Statues of the chief Vestal stood in porticos of the courtyard. Some of the sculptures in their plinth are still in existence today. The Atrium Vestae continued in existence until the Emperor Theodosius officially banned heathen worship in 391 AD. After that, it was used by imperial and then later papal court servants. So we have the nice aerial view, and we're down on ground level looking at the pools, which are, by the way, are spring-fed from water of the aqueducts. And then here we have the plinths and the statues of some of the previous Vestals. So this one is pretty badly damaged since it was originally multi-storied, and now we're down to just this lower level. Here we have what remains of the Temple of Vesta. Now, we had just been in the building that was the residence of the priestesses, but this building, at the end of the Atrium Vestae, inside had an inner sanctuary where the sacred fire burned as the symbol of the fire in the hearth of the royal palace, the ideological center of the state. Every New Year's Day in Rome, the Romans brought the fire back to their homes, which had been freshly cleaned in anticipation. The sacred fire was originally tended by the king's daughters. This was then transferred to 6 priestesses in the Republican era and then expanded later. They were usually selected between the age of 6 and 10 and had to remain in the priesthood for 30 years. And they also had to remain as virgins. The building, in addition to the sacred fire, also, according to legend, held items that Aeneas had saved from Troy when it was destroyed, and they were supposed to guarantee the eternal existence of Rome. They included the Palladium, the ancient idol of Minerva. So you have the outer circle, and then here's another view of it, and then they have reconstructed the temple a couple of blocks away near the Tiber River. Now we're going to look at the Temple of the Dioscuri. This is not very difficult to find because it only has 3 columns standing upright. It's located right here. But it's very near the Vestal Virgins temple. So sometimes if you get the right shot, you can get part of one, part of the other temple as well, such as in this picture. You see the rounded part of the Temple of Vesta, and then this wall right there, which is part of the Temple of Vesta. And then over here, this is part of the Temple of the Dioscuri. The Dioscuri, who are they? Well, it's the cult of the twins Castor and Pollux. Now, it's native to Greece, but spread to Rome in the 5th century BCE. According to legend, during the Battle of Lake Regillus in 499 BCE, when the Romans were fighting the Latins, 2 mysterious horsemen appeared and helped the Romans to gain victory. After the battle, the 2 were seen watering their horses at the spring of Juturna in the Forum, and there they announced the news of the victory to the city and disappeared. So the Romans recognized them as the Dioscuri, and their grateful dictator, Aulus Postumus Albinus, vowed to build him a temple, which was dedicated by his son in 484 BCE, and it still partially remains to this day. And the temple is headquarters to the trading standards, where the official weights and measures of the city were kept. So again, here's the temple, and then here's a view of it from up above, looking down right here. That's where it's located. And then here's some of the stones that are right near it. Now, as far as the spring of Juturna, well, it's right there. It's named after Juturna, which collected the waters of the spring, dating back to the 5th century BCE. And this is where Castor and Pollux rested their horses. The fountain was built several times between the 2nd and the 1st century BCE, and again an imperial period. It was clad in marble, and the pedestal that you see in the center held the statues of the Dioscuri. Now, in 44 BCE, we have the assassination of Julius Caesar. He was not assassinated in the Senate building in the Forum. He was assassinated at the Curia of Pompey on the Campus Martius. However, his body was cremated in the Forum area. And then Augustus set about building a temple dedicated to him, which was finished in 29 BCE. And of course, all that's left of it is the stone core, which is what you're looking at. So here you have the area where the cremation would have taken place, and that's a little closer view of it. You can eventually get to the back, and if you get to the back, here is where the cremation would have taken place. But this is the spot where Julius Caesar was cremated. There was some flowers in one area of this, but sometimes people will bring wine for a libation for the deceased and pour it over the spot. Now on the chart that you see, we have a giant expanse right here, which is the Basilica Amelia. And then if you look at the aerial view, you can see how little of it is left. Now, the few remains of this magnificent building, which originally erected in 179 BCE, it was restored several times by the Amelian family, with whose name the building remains linked after centuries. However, the renovations of 55 to 34 BCE and 14 BCE were financed mainly by Julius Caesar and Augustus. After the basilica had been severely damaged by the fire of the 3rd century AD, it was rebuilt in its old form but finally burned down at the beginning of the 5th century. So that's why it's a big open gap in here. Now, if we're down on ground level, you can see that we're buildings where you could have shopping stalls and whatever added. And then, of course, they have columns laying everywhere, giving you the idea that they still had a significant number of these. So here's another one where you can see some of the pillars that are still up, but then this brick wall. And here we have more of a foundational stone with a nice plaque on it as well. And then we come over to one section where you can see one of these surviving pillars after all of this time period. And from our vantage point, we're going to look down on what is known as Forum Square, which is this area right in here. Now, originally it was a large paved square in the center of the Forum and was the main space for public assemblies, and it remained empty of buildings throughout the Republican period. During the Empire, however, its importance decreased with the opening of the imperial forums back over in here. So monuments of various types were then built in the area, and the paving reconstructed several times over the centuries. So here we are in the middle of it, here we are looking towards the area where you have the Septimus arch, and of course the Palatine Hill would have had the temples up here. And then here we are looking off to the area where the Basilica of the Julii is located. The other side, the opposite of it, of course, that's the Curia. That is where the Senate meets. Well, we're almost at the end of the Forum area. We're going to be looking at two buildings that are almost right next to each other. One is, of course, the Curia, which is the Senate building, and the other one is the Arch of Septimus. Now, the Curia, or the Senate building, was politically the most important political organization in the Roman Republic. It exercised the rights of supervision over all that went on in the state. Well, Caesar built a new building directly beside his own forum to replace the old one because it was too small. The original one was only supposed to hold 600, and then over the years it was expanded to 1,500 and then goes back and forth. And eventually that building was burnt down in 52 BCE, and was replaced by a larger brick building that dates from the time of Diocletian, which was built after the Great Fire of 283, which actually burned this whole quarter from the Forum of Julium to the Basilica of Julia. Thanks to the extensive restoration that was done in the 1930s, the building, which at one point became the Church of St. Andriano in the 7th century, has been returned to its former glory, or I should say condition. It was under construction when we were visiting, so we didn't get to go on the inside of it, something that I was very sorry that I couldn't do. So here we have a view of as we're walking towards it. You get to see it's not a very large building. And then here we are as if we could have gone inside it. Now the original door on this you can still see. It's one of the main doors at St. John Lateran on the other side of the town, which was the first Christian church specifically built to be a Christian church by Constantine the Great, and so they put the door of the Senate there. I found some pictures of what it looks like on the inside, because the floor has been nicely restored. This is looking from the front towards the back of the building. The people would have sat on either side, and in some cases, certain times it was actually rounded like an amphitheater. Depending on whether you voted in favor or against, you would move from one side to the other. These items that you see on either side of this picture are two reliefs from the Hadrian or Trajan period. And no one really knows exactly where their original location was, but it may have been part of the orator's platform. And then here's a view from our vantage point looking over at the Curia sitting up here. So a lot of action going on in a relatively plain looking building. Now we come to our last stop in the forum before we turn to kind of head back, and we'll look at the Basilica Julia. The Arch of Septimus, the mighty triumphal arch with 3 archways, 20.88 meters, 68 feet high, 23.27 meters, 76 feet wide, is among the best preserved monuments in the forum. And one of the reasons for that is it sits up, but it's kind of down, and the Palatine Hill kind of protects it from one direction. According to the inscription on the top, it was erected by the Senate and the people of Rome, and that's indicated by the abbreviation SPQR, Senatus Populus Romanus, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the rule of Emperor Septimus and his son Caracalla in 203 AD. Originally, the inscription mentioned Geta, the second son of Septimus, but his brother Caracalla murdered him after his father's death and had his name removed from all state monuments, a procedure that's actually called damnatio memoriae. The arch is faced with marble and bears profuse relief decoration, which unfortunately is badly weathered. It celebrates the emperor's victory over the Parthians as well as the Arabs. You can walk up some steps to get a little closer to it. Behind it in this particular picture is one of the churches, and not far from it is where the prison was, where Peter and Paul were kept. Here we are getting closer to the arch. And now it's time to turn around and make one stop before heading to the Colosseum. One more vantage shot picture. Here we are looking down at this region right here, which is the location of the Basilica Julia. Julius Caesar began building this basilica, which is named after his family, in 54 BCE. And in order to build it, he had to destroy the old one, which is the Basilica Sempronia. Augustus completed the building, but it was entirely burned down a few years later. The new building, which Augustus dedicated to his grandsons and his adoptive sons Gaius and Lucius Caesar, was restored in the 3rd century by Diocletian after another fire. It was 101 meters, or 331 feet long, and 49 meters, or 160 feet wide. The building was laid out with 4 aisles and consisted of a large 3-story central hall surrounded by 2 porticos on all 4 sides. The Basilica Julia was a court of law in which the tribunal of the Centum Veri, or the 100 Men, sat to adjudicate the cases of property ownership and issues of inheritance. So we're looking through each of the different sections. So here is the view in the center section. We're looking towards the Colosseum, but that is the Temple of the Dioscuri. And then here we are one step over, final step over with the wall running down this direction on the right side. And then going over to the other side where all of the debris is, all the pieces of the temples, we look at the final view. Well, before we leave the forum, need to show you one other thing. A couple of days later, we came back and went to this building right here, which is in the center part between the 2 Capitoline museums. There's a museum on one side, a museum on the other. They have city offices in here. And then you have the openings down here, which is the foundation of one of the old temples, which you get a great view going back the other direction. So we stopped here while we were viewing the museum so we could get that final picture for the forum. So you walk down, you come down into the area of where the lower part of the temple was located, and there are several viewing areas. So here's one of them where you're looking out And you can see how far it extends. And we stopped at the first one. So this was the first one. This was the one that gave us the shot we were looking for. So out of this venue, here is the view of the Forum going back the other direction from where we came from. So there was the Basilica of Julia, and there's the square in the middle and all the other buildings. So Sheri and I certainly hope you enjoyed our trip through the Forum. Sheri and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett, and please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.